The mighty Erasure and a little respect. This is Radio 2 on the BBC Sounds app, on your smart speaker, and on 88 to 91 FM.
BBC News at 9 o'clock on Sunday, the 19th of February. Good morning, this is Catherine Cracknell. Boris Johnson wades back into the Brexit debate as Rishi Sunak edges towards a new deal with the EU. The US warns China not to supply Russia with weapons. And King Charles chooses his coronation playlist. The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has intervened in the row over post-Brexit trading arrangements in Northern Ireland as Rishi Sunak spends the weekend trying to secure a new deal with the EU. Mr Sunak wants to replace the current agreement, which in effect creates a trade border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Our political correspondent Tony Bonsignore says Mr Johnson is urging the government not to abandon legislation currently going through Parliament, which would give the government powers to unilaterally scrap parts of the deal.
The question now is, should that bill be dropped, even if a deal is reached? Boris Johnson says no, don't do it. You need it in your back pocket. You need it as a kind of threat to make sure that all this is followed through. And Rishi Sunak's team are indicating that if they get a deal, then you wouldn't need it.
The Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf and the former Holyrood Minister Ash Regan have announced they'll stand to succeed Nicola Sturgeon as the SNP leader and Scotland's First Minister. They're the first candidates to declare they plan to run. The head of the Doctors' Union, the British Medical Association, is to warn the government it's standing on the precipice of an historic mistake by not doing more to stop the industrial action in the NHS. Professor Philip Banfield will speak today at a conference in Bristol, a day before junior doctors in England announce the result of their strike ballot. Howard Johnson has been looking at what he's expected to say.
Professor Banfield will accuse the government of, in his words, consciously and deliberately overseeing the demise of the NHS at a point when it is needed most. He'll say that doctors are experiencing stress and moral injury because of poor pay and conditions. Now, in response, the Department of Health and Social Care said, as part of a deal agreed with the BMA, junior doctors' pay had increased by a cumulative 8.2% since 2019.
The United States has warned China against supplying weapons to Russia for its war against Ukraine. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke to his Chinese counterpart at a security conference in Munich. Mr Blinken told CBS that Washington was concerned about Beijing's support for Moscow.
We've been watching this very closely. To date, we have seen Chinese companies, and of course in China there's really no distinction between private companies and the state. We have seen them provide non-lethal support to Russia for use in Ukraine. The concern that we have now is based on information we have that they're considering providing lethal support. And we've made very clear to them that that causes a serious problem for us and in our relationship.
The King's coronation service in May will involve 12 newly commissioned pieces of music, including a composition by Lord Lloyd Webber. The King's personally chosen the music for the ceremony at Westminster Abbey. The royal historian Professor Kate Williams says it'll be an interesting mix of the old and new.
I've seen some criticism that there should have been younger composers, some criticism like that, but certainly what we can say is there's a lot of diversity and also a lot of focus on female composers and also female singers, just to balance out the fact that a lot of the choristers in Westminster Abbey are male.
The BAFTA Film Awards take place this evening, and for the first time the major categories will be announced live on television rather than on a delay. The German language film All Quiet on the Western Front leads the nominations with 14. Its director Edward Berger says the war in Ukraine seems to have given the film extra resonance with audiences.
I think it does, even though I'd like to hope that the film would have also connected with the audience without it. And of course, we never planned to have it be so horribly relevant because we made the film long before the Ukraine war.
Cricket and the England men's team have recorded a 267-run win over New Zealand on the fourth day of the first test. Reporting from Mount Maunganui, here's Stefan Schemilt.
England needed less than a session on the fourth day to take the remaining 5 wickets required for victory. After Jack Leach had Michael Bracewell pat to mid-wicket, James Anderson ran through the tail in figures of 4 for 18. The numbers around England's form are staggering. This is their first win in New Zealand for 15 years, their first ever in an overseas day-night night test. Ben Stokes, in 12 tests as captain, has reached 10 wins quicker than any other England skipper. His team have won 6 in a row for the first time since 2010.
And the weather, heavy and blustery rain across Northern Ireland, Northern Scotland, windy around the north coast of Northern Ireland, but across the rest of the UK it'll be breezy but dry. And that's the BBC News at 9:05.
Thank you. Here we go then.
Listen live on the...
BBC Radio 2. Steve writes.
Sunday love songs.
How you doing? Three, two, one, go.